Picture this. It's February 7th, 1979, and an elderly man shuffles toward the Atlantic Ocean on a sunlit beach in Bertioga, Brazil. The water laps at his feet, warm and inviting, the sky a brilliant blue. He wades in deeper, swimming lazily, until a sudden wave crashes over him. He flails, gasps for air, and slips beneath the surface, drowning in moments. A quiet, unremarkable end. His tombstone later reads Wolfgang Gerhard, a name lifted from a deceased Austrian man. But in 1985, forensic experts pry open his coffin, and dental records unmask the truth. This was Josef Mengele, the infamous angel of death from Auschwitz. For over 30 years, he'd evaded justice, running a carpentry business in Argentina, sipping coffee in Paraguayan cafes, hiding in plain sight in Brazilian suburbs, while the world searched for him in vain. Meanwhile, in 1965, in a sleepy German town, another doctor, Johann Kremer, dies peacefully in his bed at 81. Once a respected professor, he'd sliced into living prisoners at Auschwitz, scribbling notes about their suffering for science. He served approximately 10 years in prison before fading back into civilian life, his past buried like a forgotten footnote. These men, and hundreds like them, twisted medicine into a tool of terror during the Holocaust. Yet when the war ended, justice stumbled and they slipped away. How did they vanish? Why were they spared? Welcome to Through the Ages, where we peel back history's darkest layers. Hit subscribe and ring that bell as we uncover the scalpel that never faced trial and the world that let it slip through the cracks. In Nazi Germany, the very idea of medicine was warped beyond recognition. The Hippocratic Oath, to heal, to do no harm, was tossed aside, replaced by a chilling devotion to the Reich's racial obsessions. Doctors didn't just participate in the Holocaust. They designed it, their white coats drenched in the blood of millions. Nowhere was this more grotesque than at Auschwitz, a sprawling death factory in occupied Poland where over 1.1 million people, mostly Jews, but also Poles, Romani people, and Soviet POWs, were murdered between 1940 and 1945. At the center of this nightmare stood figures like Josef Mengele, a 32-year-old SS officer with a medical degree from Frankfurt University and a doctorate in anthropology. Arriving at Auschwitz in May 1943, he was a poster child for Nazi eugenics, the pseudoscience of purifying the Aryan race by exterminating those deemed inferior. On the train ramps, Mengele played God, his gloved hand flicking left for the gas chambers or right for slave labor, his decisions as casual as flipping a coin. But his real obsession unfolded in Block 10, the experimentation ward. Mengele fixated on twins, convinced they held the secret to boosting Aryan birth rates. He measured their skulls with calipers, injected dyes into their eyes to alter their color, often blinding them, and even tried sewing pairs together in macabre attempts to create conjoined siblings. Survivors recall his eerie composure, whistling Mozart or humming opera as children sobbed in pain. Then there was Johann Kremer, a balding, bespectacled anatomy professor from Münster University. In August 1942, he volunteered for Auschwitz duty, eager to advance his research. His diary, later captured by Allied forces, reads like a cold lab report. September 5th, 1942. Attended my first special action. Excellent material for my studies. Those special actions were the mass gassings in Birkenau's chambers, after which Kremer dissected still warm corpses, analyzing how starvation or disease ravaged their organs. His colleagues were equally monstrous. Dr. Karl Klauberg, a gynecologist, pumped caustic chemicals into women's wombs, sterilizing them and leaving them writhing in agony. Dr. Horst Schumann bombarded prisoners' genitals with X-rays, their screams a grim soundtrack to his research. These weren't outliers. They were cogs in a machine that turned humans into guinea pigs, their suffering branded as progress for the Reich's warped science. Across the camps, the Nazi medical empire ran over 70 research programs. At Dachau, doctors strapped prisoners into pressure chambers to simulate high-altitude crashes, watching them suffocate or bleed out for Luftwaffe data. At Sachsenhausen, they infected captives with malaria, testing useless drugs as fevers burned through their bodies. The evidence was meticulous. Charts, photographs, jars of preserved organs, stacked in filing cabinets like trophies. By war's end, tens of thousands had died or been mutilated, their lives reduced to data points in a regime's delusional quest. On January 27, 1945, Soviet soldiers trudged through the snow to liberate Auschwitz. They found a wasteland of suffering, skeletal survivors staggering in striped rags, piles of shoes and eyeglasses towering like monuments, and rooms stuffed with medical logs detailing the atrocities. The world gasped in horror. By November 1945, the Allies launched the Nuremberg trials to hold Nazi leaders accountable, and in December 1946, the doctors' trial zeroed in on 23 physicians. The courtroom pulsed with damning proof. Survivors with scarred arms and legs recounted their torment. Grainy photos of mutilated bodies flickered on screens, and the doctors' own notes sealed their guilt. 7 faced the gallows, their executions in 1947 a grim spectacle of retribution. For a moment, it seemed justice might prevail, until the cracks appeared. Hundreds of doctors had blood on their hands, yet only a handful faced judgment. Mengele, tipped off in early 1945, ditched his SS uniform for a Wehrmacht disguise and melted into Bavaria as a farmhand. By 1949, he'd slipped through the ratlines, secret escape routes run by Nazi sympathizers, crooked officials, and even some Vatican priests who feared communism more than fascism. He landed in Argentina, a haven for ex-Nazis, with a forged passport and a new life. Kremer's escape was less dramatic, but just as galling. Arrested in Poland in 1947, he was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to death in the Auschwitz trial. This sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, but only served approximately 10 years before being released in 1958 due to an amnesty. He returned to Münster, resuming life as a scholar. In 1960, he was tried and sentenced to 10 years. However, the court credited Kremer for the time he had served in Poland and allowed him to walk free. The Allies had the evidence, thousands of victims, dozens of projects, but the will to pursue justice faded fast. The Cold War loomed by 1947, pitting the US against the USSR in a frantic scramble for dominance. Nazi doctors morphed from villains into bargaining chips. Under Operation Paperclip, the US scooped up scientists like Wernher von Braun, whose V-2 rockets had killed thousands, to jumpstart the space race. The Soviets mirrored this, snagging experts for their own labs. In this new world, a doctor's scalpel was less a weapon of crime and more a tool of leverage. Justice became a luxury no one could afford. Post-war, these doctors didn't just survive, they thrived, their pasts scrubbed clean by new identities or geopolitical convenience. Mengele's journey was a saga of evasion and arrogance. In Argentina, he lived as Helmut Greger, managing a carpentry shop and schmoozing with fellow ex-Nazis at Buenos Aires haunts. By 1959, with Israel's Mossad sniffing closer, having nabbed Adolf Eichmann in 1960, he bolted to Paraguay, then Brazil, always dodging the net. He penned letters to his son, Rolf, crowing about his adventures and griping about his misfortune. His end came in 1979, swimming off that Brazilian beach. His death confirmed years later when his twisted pelvis, a war injury, matched the records. Kremer took a subtler route. Freed in 1958, he returned to Münster, resuming life as a scholar. He attended medical conferences, published papers, and blended into the community, dying in 1965. His neighbors none the wiser. Others climbed higher. Dr. Hans Munch, an SS physician at Auschwitz, dodged conviction at Nuremberg for lack of direct evidence. He settled in Bavaria, opened a practice, and treated patients into the 1990s, his war years a hushed rumor. Dr. Ottmar von Verschuer, Mengele's mentor and a eugenics pioneer, reinvented himself as a respected geneticist in West Germany, his Nazi ties conveniently overlooked. The Cold War cast a long shadow. Survivors sometimes glimpsed their tormentors in everyday life, reading the paper at a cafe, strolling a park, living lives stolen from the dead. In West Germany, rebuilding trumped reckoning. Prosecuting old men disrupted the narrative of renewal. The US and USSR, meanwhile, cherry-picked expertise over ethics, letting the scalpel's edge gleam unpunished. The aftermath was a tangle of pain, fury, and uneasy silence. Survivors like Eva Mozes Kor, a twin Mengele experimented on, bore their scars into the spotlight. In 1995, Kor stood before an audience and forgave the Nazis, not to absolve them, but to reclaim her peace. Her words ignited debate. Was forgiveness healing, or did it soften the demand for justice? Others, like Simon Wiesenthal, the relentless Nazi hunter, rejected closure. From his cluttered Vienna office, he tracked leads worldwide, his files swelling with names of doctors who'd slipped away. In the 1960s and 70s, German prosecutors dusted off cases, but time outran them. Most culprits were elderly or dead, their trials symbolic at best. Mengele's grave in São Paulo sat under a fake name until 1992, when his bones were dug up and donated to a medical school. A bitter irony for a man who treated bodies as experiments. Kremer's 1965 death barely registered, his obituary praising his academic career. The world's response fractured. Israel built Yad Vashem, etching victims' names into stone as a defiant memory. Germany wove Holocaust lessons into its schools, confronting its shame through education and monuments. Yet in some quiet villages, locals shielded their upstanding doctors, and a few grumbled about excessive justice. By the 2000s, the era of trials had faded. Archives held the doctors' files, yellowing pages of horror, but the last survivors were dying, their voices thinning. Was justice served? 7 hanged, but dozens, maybe hundreds, walked free. For every name honored, countless others dissolved into history's fog. The scalpel that never faced trial lies in the past, sharp, unjudged, and unresolved. What do you think? Share your take below.